Is Micro Four Thirds the ultimate hack for wildlife photography? I know you've seen them, that person that's in your local park trying to photograph a tiny bird and they swear by OM system. And after using the OM1 Mark II in some of their lenses in Yellowstone over the last couple of weeks, I can say with certainty that Micro Four Thirds is thriving in this medium. But of course, like everything, it doesn't come without some drawbacks and some things that have prevented me from fully crossing over into the Micro Four Thirds realm. My name is Matt Zeffi. I make videos about photography and videography, and recently I decided to move full-time inside of a camper traveling across the US. And as a disclaimer, this video is sponsored by OM System, but of course they have no say on what I say in this video, and all opinions are my own. And honestly, this video was my idea in the first place, so I just wanted to throw out that disclaimer. Let's jump into the video. So what exactly is Micro Four Thirds? Well, it's essentially a sensor size, and the OM1 Mark II is the flagship camera from OM System with a very small sensor when you compare it to other full-frame cameras, of course. It's about half the size, so if this has a 2x crop factor, this 150 to 400 that I have on here turns into a 300 to 800, and it's a f/4.5. More on this later, but all in all, that's incredible. The OM1 Mark II, their flagship camera, has around 20 megapixels, and you might be thinking that's pretty low when it comes to megapixels. But here's the thing, with a 2x crop already on your sensor because of a smaller sensor size, you don't really need to crop as much as you would with some of those larger format cameras. When you think about megapixels, it kind of helps with two things, printing and cropping, and both of those are still possible with 20 megapixels. The cropping is much more limited, of course, but being that you're already at a 2x crop because of a smaller sensor means that you don't need to crop as much. And when you have a smaller sensor, you also get a smaller ecosystem when you consider the fact that this is a 150 to 400. Just picture how tiny this thing is while still being a relatively fast lens that lets in a good amount of light. And I wish, oh my gosh, I wish I could like hand this to you in from the camera, because it honestly is extremely lightweight as well. And as nature photographers, we are covering a ton of ground in the field. We're out there, like this entire week I've been doing some not serious hiking, but I've been hiking with a lot of gear, and having a system that doesn't weigh 1,000,000 pounds is a huge deal, if I'm being honest. And the question that I've really been pondering a lot lately is the fact that it's like you are carrying around all this extra glass in order to cover a larger sensor and let in a lot of light, of course, while you end up eliminating so much of that coverage and some megapixels as well in post, to the point where it's like, well, then you just carry it around for nothing. And then there's the aspect about just sheer size. And when I'm going out on trips, like I take like it really depends on the trip. I take all of my gear for the most part, but wildlife lenses, of course, these telephotos, they take up the most space. And so I've had to have specialized backpacks, spending more money on extra backpacks, always being concerned about, you know, the person at the flight attendant like asking me to check my bag in, and I'm always like, but please, I have lithium batteries or something like that, which is true. So beyond just hiking with the gear, also being able to store the gear in a smaller space is another big deal, especially for wildlife photographers. It's not like any of us are stationary in a studio setting or anything like that. We are all pretty much on the go all the time, flying, traveling, driving places, and hiking places. And so having a smaller and compact system, to me, has always been one of the most important factors. Obviously, image quality is like my top thing, but having a portable system that's relative to that is also very, very important to me, especially as someone who lives in a camper and doesn't have a whole lot of space. I think I've got like more photo and video equipment than clothes, which if you've seen my other videos, you probably have seen me repeat outfits, and you know what? It is what it is. There have been multiple scenarios while I've been here in Yellowstone where I've put this in a full frame head-to-head because I just want to see how do the focal lengths compare. Being able to get so much closer to wildlife without encroaching on their space, which you never want to do, and also maintaining a safe distance in general, has made this really, really helpful. But obviously there's going to be a resolution difference with some of those full frame cameras which have significantly more megapixels in general. So let's talk about the 2x crop just a little bit more. All of the OM system lenses, like the 150 to 400, the 300 that I've been using, the 50 to 200, one of my favorite wildlife lenses of all time, it's the 50 to 200 f2.8, which is a 100 to 400 equivalent when you think about that 2x crop on a full frame camera. Having that 2x crop does not prevent you from getting environmental portraits. There was one I took of a bison in Yellowstone with this just epic sunset in the background. It was one of my favorite images of the week, and you still have the versatility to zoom out to short focal ranges while still being able to get that insane reach, like up to 800 mil on a full frame. Touching on the camera a little bit more, the OM1 Mark II. This is a fully stacked micro four thirds sensor. It is 20 megapixels, but fully stacked. I'm sure you've heard that term being tossed around a lot lately, but because of that, it has a very fast readout speed, around 8 milliseconds. And what that means is if you're photographing wildlife with a rolling shutter sensor and you try and pan the camera too fast, maybe if you're shooting sports as well, it can cause a little bit of distortion in your image, making the wildlife look too weird. That's not going to happen with an 8 millisecond readout speed. Unless you're panning like crazy fast or shooting like F1 or golf or something, but in 98+% of scenarios, 8 milliseconds is extremely fast and more than fast enough. And 120 frames per second is still a very novel thing in this whole photography world. There are not a lot of cameras that have that. This camera is not exactly new at this point, yet still has that spec. It also has a feature called ProCap that you can enable to essentially start taking photos before you fully press the shutter. So you half press the shutter down and then it'll start taking images, but once you fully press the shutter down, it'll register those images and save them so that if a bird takes off in flight, you can capture that entire sequence, or if an animal leaps into action, you won't have to worry about missing a moment. And honestly, this has become like a staple in my wildlife photography cameras. Like once you have this feature, it is really difficult to go back, so it's amazing that you're able to enable that. Jumping into the handheld stability and stabilization overall, but I'm someone who shoots handheld 99% of the time, and with this camera I've been shooting 100% of the time. Haven't even taken the tripod out, both for photo and video. Aside from not having to take a tripod around, which is already really annoying, it also allows you to lower your shutter speed because you don't have to worry too much about your handheld shake. Alright, so now I've got to address some of the downsides to Micro Four Thirds systems, especially in the context of wildlife photography. Starting with number one, and I sort of touched on some of these throughout this video, but one, a smaller sensor is not going to gather as much light as a larger sensor. That's pretty much the case across the board for any size sensor. And because of that, as you would expect, even with a faster lens, when all things are compared apples to apples, then it's not going to have the same low light performance, meaning that the low light performance isn't necessarily the best. Now, I have been impressed with the low light performance of this camera, especially because of those faster lenses. But you know, if you were to like look at sensors, what's going to gather more light? The larger sensor with a larger surface area. And number two, sort of a major one, if you're a heavy cropper, maybe you're someone who likes taking larger environmental portraits and then being able to crop into those close-ups of wildlife. You can crop to a certain extent, but certainly not the same amount as you would with a higher megapixel sensor or camera. If you saw my video on the OM5 Mark II, where I was specifically talking more about landscapes in that video that I shot with that camera, well, then you know that I didn't really find a significant difference in that video where I directly compared two landscape images between a 60 megapixel camera and the 20 megapixels of the OM5 Mark II. Now, one area where I do notice a larger difference, and I've noticed this when I've done portraiture with OM system as well, has to be the depth of field. Micro Four Thirds does not have as much depth of field, or I should say as shallow of a depth of field as easily attainable with a full frame, or if you ever shot on medium format, you know that it gets extremely shallow very quick. Now, to be fair, their telephoto lenses are significantly faster than most of the competitors, especially at this size and focal length. This is noticeable, in my opinion, in the field. However, when you're shooting at greater focal lengths, you get an increased depth of field, and then you could open up that aperture to compensate for all of these. And honestly, it's still really solid when it comes to depth of field, shallow depth of field, and compression. Another thing is it's only capable of 12-bit photos, which just means it doesn't have as much color information as some other camera systems out there. Many of my wildlife photography cameras shoot 14-bit photos in RAW, And that just means there's not as much latitude or information to be able to work with in post-processing. If you're not someone who even does a lot of post-processing, then it doesn't really matter. And I don't personally, especially for wildlife photography, don't really do much post-processing, but I kind of like just having the information there. There is a way to enable 14-bit on this if you're shooting in high-res shot mode, but it's just, that's really for landscapes, which is really cool because it can give you a high-res 80 megapixel photo, but again, that's more so for landscape and still subjects. And lastly, I was shooting video a lot with this camera, almost entirely handheld. It does shoot 10-bit video, like it has good video specs, and again, the stabilization is just incredible when you're considering the focal lengths that I filmed many of these clips at, and just look how stable it was. However, I'm still not crazy about the video that I've gotten out of a Micro Four Thirds sensor. I think it's mostly in like lower light scenarios. If I was a hybrid shooter shooting maybe 60 to 80% video or something like that, I wouldn't choose a Micro Four Thirds system then. So who exactly is this for? I would say like any wildlife photography shooters who need that extreme speed at an 8 millisecond readout speed, who need 120 frames per second if they're specifically looking at the OM1 Mark II in all of these scenarios, and someone who's like covering a lot of ground, like travel photographers and people who are hiking in and looking for wildlife, that sort of thing. You could do landscapes as well with a system like this. Maybe not so much with the telephoto lenses this extreme because that's very close, but with the high-res shot modes that they have, you can bump that up to like 80 megapixels, which is incredible. And I've taken some of my favorite landscapes ever with the OM system cameras. I would say mostly like photo first shooters should opt for something like this. Folks who don't want an extremely large rig where compact size and weight are an absolute necessity. But I would say it's not exactly for the folks who need the most amount of resolution. Maybe you're doing massive prints, although I would definitely argue you could still print massive photos even with 20 megapixels. At the end of the day, Micro Four Thirds, it isn't for everybody, but I would say that it is definitely one of the best options out there for nature photographers. It's certainly one of the biggest hacks for wildlife photography that I've come across, and I really appreciated the images that I took with this system in the past couple of weeks here in Yellowstone. But I'm curious to hear from you. What do you think? Is Micro Four Thirds the ultimate hack for wildlife photography? Let me know down in the comments. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to hit the like button and subscribe if you're new here. I've got so much coming in the very near future. And also, if you've got the time, YouTube thinks you should check out this video as well. I would greatly appreciate it. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you out there on the road.